that we also have to enforce our regulations. And with that, if there are breaches, we do administer sanctions and penalties. During the period under review, the Prudential Authority imposed administrative sanctions and penalties on the following institutions: the Land Bank Insurance Company, the Land Bank Insurance Company again, and you can also see the Lloyd's and Lloyd's Underwriters and Nedbank. The sanctions and penalties are on the right side. There are other PA decisions that had been taken, and with effect from the 21st December 2021, 360 life business in terms of the Insurance Act was placed under provisional curatorship by an order of the High Court of South Africa. Ms. Yashonda Rem, then from BDO Advisory Services, was provisionally appointed as the curator of the business of 360 Life, and the High Court of South Africa issued specific directives to the curator to take immediate control of the business. The High Court initially set a return date of the 12th April 2022, at which time 360 or any other interested party could show cause why the provisional order and the curator's power should not be made final. The return date was anticipated by the board of 360 and brought forward to the 22nd of March 2022. The High Court on the 22nd of March 2022 heard from the interested parties who opposed the confirmation of the provisional curatorship, and from the PA, which requested confirmation of the curatorship. After this hearing, judgment in the matter was reserved. On the 30th of September 2022, the High Court granted the order confirming the curatorship of 360 and cancelled the appointment of Ms. Yashonda Ram with effect. Mr. Tinashe Shoko of BDO Advisory Services as the final curator of 360 Life with effect from the 30th of September 2022. 360 submitted an application to appeal against the confirmation of the curatorship. As a result of the appeal, the High Court's order of the 30th of September 2022 was suspended by default. On the 21st of February this year, the High Court appointed Ms. Famija Peterson Cook as the final curator of 360. She, together with her team, are currently in the process of finalizing outstanding audits for 2020, 2021, and 2022, and together with the external auditors of the firm. The audit process are protracted as there has been a material breakdown in critical controls within the insurer during the audit process. There is additional information that I will not go through that I have just included here for completeness. And maybe let me just final word on the Financial Action Task Force, that at its plenary meeting in February, the FATF recognized South Africa's extensive efforts to address the recommendations highlighted in the Mutual Evaluation Report of October 2021. This included the following: various remedial actions to address and enhance the application of its risk-based approach to supervision relating to anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. The PA issued guidance and directives to supervised entities, introduced a mandatory requirement for the submission of risk returns, developed an automated risk tool to profile sectors, and issued the second round of sector risk assessment reports. Due to a few remaining areas requiring further action, the FATF added South Africa to its list of jurisdictions under increased monitoring, so-called grey listing. work in the areas identified by the FATF for further remediation has been prioritized to meet the deadline of January 2025 for South Africa's removal from the list. So, Chair, that concludes the presentation of the report. And as I said in the earlier conversation, that we have split the presentation into two, and at this point, I would like to pause and we could take questions with respect to the economic outlook and the annual report, and then we can then move to the second part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Governor, for the presentation, the annual report. Members, there we are. Are there clarity-seeking questions? Are there comments? Dr. George, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks very much for the presentation. It is very clear. Yes, it is quite troubling that our economic growth is not going to reach the growth as projected in the budget in February, which means that we might very well have significant difficulties in October when we would have to revise downward the revenue collection. But anyway, I think the point is pointed out that our economy isn't growing, and also that inflation is being driven by administered prices to some extent, and that is within government's purview. And that I know is not the bank's purview, and I certainly take that up with the minister. I have one question regarding the banks that fall outside of the framework and domain of the Reserve Bank, or it seems that way. So, for example, if you look at the Land Bank and you look at the Post Bank that is in progress, and possibly other banks that, for example, I know Gauteng is looking at, or the Gauteng government provincial government is looking at setting up a provincial government bank, which I believe is quite problematic. So how do you manage those banks, given that they do actually introduce systemic risk into the economy? And as we know, for example, on the Land Bank, when we went on visit to them, that they've borrowed money from many, many places, and they're unable to to service that debt, and that interventions have been required. So how do you manage that systemic risk of banks that exists but are not within the regulatory framework of the Reserve Bank? Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mavileta, and then Honorable Maswal.
Thank you, Chair. Governor, thank you for the presentation. Even though you have performed well, you're still saying the underlying inflation is still too high, and we know that that is an ongoing process. And then, I'm also, have for comfort because you are saying your ongoing priority is to get the underlying inflation back to 45%, and your target range is 2025. We will obviously be monitoring that. I want to speak for the women. I see that on preferential procurement, you have consistently maintained maximum points for the Black women-owned category since the 2016-17 financial year, which marks 7 consecutive years now of solid performance in this area. Thank you so much. And also I also want to comment on the corporate social investment that is focused on schools. You are doing very well there. I can see that for the 2023 years, you have now provided support to social needs schools by 3 million. And in the past, you were not providing for social needs schools. Thank you for that as well. And also, you have done that. The other thing is even if you have provided for this 3 million, even though the MPC school challenge was cancelled due to COVID-19, we shouldn't forget that other problems are COVID-19. Workshops were conducted prior cancellation. And then on HR, you have now 3 percentage point increase in the number of Black people occupying top and senior management points. That amount to something. Thank you for that as well. And African female increased by 61% from 58%. I just want to say thank you for that. You know that this is hard work and you are doing very well. I also saw a slide when I was reading here. There was a slide that was said target reach. And you know, I was impressed. Thank you, Governor and team. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bomabileta. Honorable Maswali.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and greetings to the committee, greetings as well to the Governor and the team. It's a very short one on my part. I had heard the Governor speak to the impact of inflation on the different quintiles that we have characterized in society. And he spoke with passion on how the vulnerable are affected by the rise in inflation. Perhaps any comments from the bank as to how to remedy that, because certainly that's the majority of the population that is suffering. Do they consider it in their purview? If yes, what measures are put in place to address that matter? Or if not, what generally would be the comments of the Governor in that regard? I really felt the passion as he was speaking to that matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Maswali. Honorable Manya.
Thank you, Chairperson. First, I welcome the presentation. Mine is a very small request on the Prudential Authority section. There's a company, 360 Degrees, which is basically the only Black company left in South Africa in this financial services space. This company has been, and I've listened to the report here by the Governor in terms of what has happened thus far. But those people have been contacting us and complaining bitterly that all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank to get the matter resolved, they're just getting ignored. All the efforts they've been trying to make discussion to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this platform, to get the matter resolved, is that in this all the efforts they've been trying to make meetings with the Reserve Bank on this That
that inflation ravages the to show look at that chart ravages the poorest experience inflation of the richest look at that chart experience inflation the poorest experience inflation of the pensioners experience inflation of 5.3%, which is again higher than the headline inflation. The pensioners. So the message is very clear. For a country serious about dealing with poverty, higher than the headline inflation, you have got to protect the vulnerable from the ravages of inflation. For a country serious about and so higher than in a way, when you're spelling out from the ravages of the people that you're talking about from the rural areas who would be in that far left bar of the chart, like the poorest decile, and decile 2, decile 3, when you look at that, you would know that dealing with inflation is necessarily pro-poor. And so the notion that says that forget inflation because we have got poverty is a wrong notion, because the poor experience even higher inflation than those people with the means. Those people there at the upper decile there, they are most likely having shares, they are having bonds, they are having properties, and as such have got a protection against inflation that the people on the far left do not have, because those people are the poorest amongst us. And so Honorable Maswale then asked the question, how do we go about protecting the poor against that impact, those vulnerable against the impact of inflation, if we can? Well, the only instruments that we have and what our contribution from the bank would be to bring down that overall inflation, because when inflation comes down, it also does come down for the poor. But Honorable Maswale raises a very important point, and it raises the issue of how you deploy the other instruments to cushion the poor on this. So I'll just go back in history and say, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2008, we had a huge rise in food and fuel prices. And one of the earlier responses then by the South African government was to say, let us do something to protect the value of the grants, because food prices have gone up. That is one. But there are other measures this government has taken, including the provision of free basic electricity and free basic water and so forth, that help to cushion the poor. Put simply, dealing with inflation is the primary responsibility of the Reserve Bank, but it is in no ways that the Reserve Bank could be solely responsible for the bringing down of inflation. And the reason has to do with the other slide that I had projected, which showed what had happened with water prices, what had happened with electricity prices, what had happened with rates and taxes, and so forth. And government has got a significant role to play in setting those prices to cushion the poor against the ravages of inflation. And that would be the take that we have. Yes, there are all these other economic goals that we must all pursue, deploying all the other instruments that we have as a country. But one thing is clear: high inflation is not in the interests of the poor. Chair, I think we have dealt with all the questions. The others were compliments.
Okay. Honorable Manya, I see DG Naidu has raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, with your permission, I wouldn't mind responding to Honorable Nkwankwa's question about inflation targeting and monetary dominance. Chair, in my view, in our view, I think South Africa has got lots of economic problems. One of the few economic successes that we have had in the last 30 years is that A, we have brought down inflation consistently over the last 30 years to lower and lower anchors. And secondly, that has been reflected in lower and lower interest rates. As was illustrated by the governor on that graph on the repo rate, the governor made the point that every peak has been lower than the previous one. And that's because we've been successful at bringing down inflation. So, Chair, there are many economic ills in South Africa. The impact of that is high unemployment, weak economic growth, high levels of poverty, high levels of inequality. One of the economic successes that we have had is due to inflation targeting. And while we must seek urgent solutions to the problems of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, we should be careful not to ditch what works and what has worked and what has made a positive impact on those indicators in our fight against poverty and inequality and unemployment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, DG. I do. Let's go back to members who want to ask further questions. There is a request, members and participants from the media, in particular TV. As you can see, there's high interest of the media on this meeting, that we show our faces when we take the platform. It's a request, and I think Honorable Manye, being a former DG of communications, understand it better than some of us in this platform. Over to you, Mhlegazi Manye.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, my request has not been acceded to. In fact, the way it's being responded to confirms the issue that the Reserve Bank does not want to meet the client, as it were. And this company, 360 Degrees, is very frustrated, Chairperson. You have a situation here where this company has been under curatorship for the past 2 years. And in this past 2 years, this company is saying they have actually recovered. Now, the curator has got no incentive to close this matter. And the simple reason is that the curator is paying himself, or herself rather, that she's paying herself 2.4 million every month. So there's no incentive at all. So I requested, dear Chair, that I'm not here to debate the matter here. Don't think it's an appropriate place for me to be debating this with the Reserve Bank and all of that. All I am requesting is the Reserve Bank to please meet 360 Degrees. Why is that a difficult request to accede to? That's all I'm asking for. Because the 360 is saying the curator which we have appointed is abusing basically her space in terms of continuing to curate what has been curated, as it were. The company has recovered and all of that. And I don't want to go into those details, Chair. The simple thing here, why is it difficult for the Reserve Bank to accede to a meeting? Then whatever issues they need to thrash out, whatever input they have from the curator, which they say they've met this past Monday, then they can deal with all these matters in that meeting. All we're asking for is a simple thing, a meeting, that's all. Not a discussion here, not a debate on the matters, just a simple meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Manye. I see DG Chasbani will be ready to respond. Honorable Manye, there's nothing wrong in you raising issues very sharply because it's your constituency and you should not be apologetic about that because they approached you and they will expect a response or a report back from you. So feel free to raise questions that come from your constituency very sharply and even make sure that there's a follow-up. I remember that last time you raised the matter with me and I thought this is the platform that this matter, without going into the merit of the matter, because what you are requesting is that there be a meeting. The rest of the issues will be dealt with at that platform. So are there other questions from members? Before we move to the next item, and I think DG Chazbani will respond to the follow-up question from Honorable Manya, Dr. George, and then Honorable Kwankwa.
Thank you, Chair. A question I did want to ask during the presentation was why it seems as if M3 money supply is increasing by approximately 10% year on year, while our economic growth remains lower than 1%, probably at 0. So, because I've been looking at those numbers and I'm wondering why that is so. Thank you.
Thanks. Honorable Kwankwa.
I also wanted to deal with the money supply issue, Chair. It seems like Dr. George has taken the words out of my mouth. But the second issue would be, I think perhaps the difference between what we was... Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I'm saying, can you see me, Chair?
Yeah, we can see you. Even your constituency can see you.
I'm saying Dr. George, to a large extent, has covered me because I also wanted to deal with the money supply issue. But the second issue has to do with the fact that I suppose I had the response, but I think the difference between what the Reserve Bank is trying to do, which I accept that there's a valid reason in which for them to try and fight inflation. And they are saying it's been working for a long time. And what we are seeking to suggest to them is ideological, really. But thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Kwankwa. Before, let me also raise a question, not a question, but more of a comment. Governor, you had put a slide there about the ownership of the financial institutions and the share market of those financial institutions. And I think you said that the 5 banks have got a share of 89.5%, which is almost 90%. And the insurance sector, you also gave a breakdown where you indicated that those who are in the lead are foreign-owned, which is problematic, that our economy in the financial sector, part of it is dominated by foreign-owned institutions. The transformation of the financial sector is very crucial. I'm not asking a question. I think this is a matter that we can take it up with National Treasury, because that's the department responsible, and NEDLEC. The financial transformation sector, transformation of the financial sector is very critical. It's not a matter that we can run away from, more especially the constituency that I represent, with the figures that you have shown there on the screen. The ownership itself, who own these financial institutions? The banks, the insurance sector, the management control. Who is in control of the management of those financial institutions? The services that are procured. Do blacks provide services to those financial institutions? That enterprise development and a whole range of other things. Because we can't talk as if South Africa is not in Africa, where the majority are blacks, and the blacks are outside the mainstream of the financial sector, and we keep quiet about it. It can't be business as usual. Next year, 27th of April, we'll be celebrating 30 years of democracy. And I don't think we can celebrate 30 years of democracy with this kind of figures, and we keep quiet. something has to be done about it. And I think, as I've said, probably it's not your space. You just give figures here. You deal with regulations and other related matters. But in making sure that the sector is transformed, Treasury, NETLEC, and other sectors or organizations and departments, I'm not sure about trade and industry, which are responsible for monitoring the issue of broad-based Black economic empowerment, should take this matter very seriously and not sugarcoat it in the interest of South Africans, and in particular, the Black majority, which myself, coming from the ANC, I represent in this parliament. So it's a serious matter that we can't just look at it as a figure projected on the annual report of SARB and the PA, and we keep quiet about it. It has to be taken up at a particular level. Please respond to the questions that members had made followed up, and then if there are no other follow-up questions, then we'll move to the next item. Thanks.
DG Kasim, I want you to deal with the money supply figures, and then Fundi will just close off on the 360.
Thank you very much, Governor. So the question of money supply and its growth as a predictor of the economy has obviously been severed over the years beyond the time of Milton Friedman. I think that the main issue about why the money supply is not a predictor of GDP growth is that in many ways, money supply consists of the monetary base, which are bank deposits, bank reserves, the reserves that financial institutions keep with us. It is the money in circulation. It is the deposits that institutions keep with us. But that circulation of money, it is not necessarily a kind of a prediction of the income in the economy. Also remember that when we talk about income, we're talking about real income, which is nominal income minus inflation. So I think that the important determinant of economic growth in the economy is what is happening to real income. And one of the ways in which we can see real income is to look at the income of households and look at how much they consume. So one aspect of money supply is an important determinant of what can happen in the economy, and that is a broader definition of money supply, which includes M4, which includes credit supply in the economy. So when we look at credit growth in the economy, credit growth is more or less just slightly above inflation. But even credit growth in itself can only take economic growth up to a certain point if there's no income growth. So, our household debt to GDP has been growing, but a bit moderately. So at the end of the day, in fact, a lot of the poor can't, use their income to spend. It's only, the very rich and some of the deciles that can actually borrow. So it is not unusual to have a high nominal growth in money supply and not be able to square that up with the real growth in income. There's a lot of turnover activity in the financial sector that may not have an immediate bearing on actual real growth of GDP and employment in the economy. Thank you.
If I may return on the question asked by Honorable Mani, maybe language has failed me. Just to clarify, we are available to meet with 360 at any time. We have been meeting with them. We will continue to meet with them. We are available via text message, through all forms, Dr. Mani. We are always here to have that conversation with them. And on our side, we hadn't thought that there was a breakdown in communication, but we will certainly reach out to them and continue to reach out to them until we can find each other in some form. So on the chair's question around the foreign banks, Chair. Just to clarify that foreign-owned banks in our system only account for 7% of total banking assets, but they play a very critical role in terms of trade finance and also facilitating our access as a country to foreign savings. So the way that you should think about the role that they play is if a foreign firm is coming to make an investment in South Africa, it is useful for them to have their home bank that is based in South Africa to assist them in facilitating that transaction. The second important role that foreign-owned banks play for us is they also afford us with important correspondent banking relationships. So a South African bank that is assisting a South African company or even us as individuals in making transfers to foreign jurisdictions, that activity needs to be facilitated by another bank on the other side. That is another important role that they play. They also play an active role in the primary dealer market in terms of facilitating the trade of bonds as well, including the purchase, the buying and selling of South African government bonds to non-residents, among others as well. So that is a unique role that they play. They're not taking away the space that South African banks are fulfilling, but they play a slightly different role in the value chain. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I just a 30-second addition, I think there was a little bit of a misunderstanding. Our insurance sector is dominated by South African-owned firms. The reinsurance part of that sector is dominated by foreign firms. In aggregate, the reinsurance sector is very small, but Chair, it's the reinsurance sector that is dominated. The South African firms, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but reinsurance is probably only 2 to 3% of the total sector. That component is dominated by foreign firms, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. If we're done with this part, then we can move to the next part of the presentation by the Reserve Bank. Over to you, Governor.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're moving on to the second part of our presentation, which is the SARB's findings on the Phala Phala investigation. Just by way of background, the allegations against the president were that he received and kept at his premises, without declaring to the relevant authorities, foreign currency in the form of United States dollars. The investigation in this matter was premised on the allegations by Mr. Fraser that on 9 February 2020, there was a housebreaking incident at the president's main house at the Phala Phala farm, and that the foreign currency in question was stolen. The SARB conducted an investigation into the matter through our financial surveillance department. The financial surveillance department's investigation deals only with the alleged contravention of Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 in respect of foreign currency allegedly stolen from the president's residence at the Phala Phala farm on the 9th of February 2020. Regulation 6.1 is the applicable exchange control regulation in relation to the declaration of foreign currency within 30 days after becoming so entitled to an authorized dealer and or financial surveillance department. Therefore, the scope and purpose of the financial surveillance investigation and the final report are limited to whether there were exchange control violations. Other matters and whether they may relate to the breach of any other law or otherwise are matters which are to be addressed by the relevant authorities and or regulatory bodies and not the South African Reserve Bank. Regulation 6.1 provides that every person resident in the Republic who becomes entitled to sell or to procure the sale of any foreign currency shall within 30 days after becoming so entitled make or cause to be made a declaration in writing of such foreign currency to the Treasury or to an authorized dealer. The exchange control regulations generally do not apply to non-residents of the Republic. Currency, including foreign currency, physically introduced into the Republic is dealt with in terms of the customs and excise legislation and by the South African Revenue Services. So, any cash that crosses our border at the point of entry has to be declared to SARB. It is a customs matter, not an exchange control matter. There is a declaration form that must be filled at the point of entry, and that declaration is made to SARB, not to SARB. The mere possession of foreign currency is not what is regulated in terms of the foreign exchange control regulations. Between June and September 2022, the Financial Surveillance Department engaged with the President's attorneys and received an initial affidavit and supplementary affidavit from the President and additional information from the President's legal team, and further affidavits and statements were also received, including an affidavit by Mr. von Wellach, the General Manager of Ntabanyoni Estates Close Cooperation, which trades as Phala Phala Wildlife and is also referred to as Phala Phala Farm. A signed statement by Mr. Hasim, the buyer, and a sworn statement by Mr. Ndlovu, the acting lodge manager of Phala Phala Farm. As at the end of September 2022, the position based on the information obtained by the Financial Surveillance Department can be summarized as follows. During 2019, the President and Mr. van Wellach had a discussion and decided that certain lower quality buffaloes located in Camp 6 on the Phala Phala Farm ought to be sold. On the 25th of December 2019, Mr. Hasim arrived at the Phala Phala Farm, and on Mr. Hasim's version, he identified 20 buffaloes that he was happy with. Mr. Ndlovu advised him that the price per buffalo was $400,000 rands. Mr. Hasim considered the amount to be reasonable, and in order to secure the 20 buffaloes that he was interested in, he gave $580,000 to Mr. Ndlovu. On Mr. Hasim's version, he gave the $580,000 as security deposit. It would be used as payment for the buffaloes only once he had secured and buyers relate that information to Parapara Wildlife. According to the president and Mr. Ndlovu, the purchase could not be finalized until the necessary approvals were obtained and further processes were undertaken. Mr. Ndlovu provided Mr. Hasim with a note to record the fact that he had received the $580,000 in cash from him. Mr. Ndlovu stored the funds in the safe of the Parapara farm and informed the president on 26 December 2019 of what had transpired the previous day. The president advised Mr. Ndlovu that the money could only be dealt with upon his return to the Parapara farm when he would, quote, have the transaction discussed and processed with Mr. von Wellach, close quote. On or about the 30th of December 2019, Mr. Ndlovu decided to move the foreign currency from the safe to which many employees had access and which was used for general storage purposes at Parapara farm to a bedroom in the president's house in the Parapara farm, which he considered to be a safer place, and hid it under the cushions of a sofa for fear of same being stolen while he would be on leave. On 10th February 2020, it was discovered that the president's house had been broken into and the foreign currency stolen. Based on the information, documentation, and evidence received and considered at the end of September 2022, FinServ determined that further information, evidence, and investigation would be required in order to conclude the investigation into this matter, and in particular, whether the agreement for the sale of 20 buffaloes was concluded on the 25th of December 2019, but the obligations to pay and deliver the buffalo were subject to conditions of whether the conclusion of the agreement itself was subject to conditions. With regard to the pertinent issue of the nature of the agreement concluded with Mr. Hasim, FinServ were advised inter alia that Mr. Hasim and Mr. Ndlovu did not conclude an agreement for the sale of the buffalo on the 25th of December 2019. That is because Mr. Ndlovu needed to obtain approval on the correctness of the pricing for each buffalo from Mr. von Wellach. Mr. Hasim and the money paid the money to Mr. Ndlovu to secure the buffaloes, but on the understanding that the agreement was subject to the following conditions. One, that the final total price had to be confirmed, and that several administrative steps needed to be successfully completed in order to arrange for export and delivery. The outcome of this process was in itself subject to various tests and veterinary procedures that had to be undertaken. These include notifying the state vet about the buffaloes that are intended to be sold so that they can be tested. The state vet will ensure that the negative test results and start the application process to move the buffaloes to the final destination. Parapara Wildlife will apply for a transportation permit at the Department of Agriculture. Once the final transportation permit is received from the Department of Agriculture, arrangements for the transportation of the buffaloes can commence. This whole process, we told, can take between 3 to 18 months, depending on the destination. Early in 2023, and after having considered the responses received, the Financial Surveillance Department proceeded to conduct interviews with, firstly, Mr. Van Vellag on the 14th of February 2023, Mr. Ndlovu on the 21st of February 2023, a further interview with Mr. Van Vellag on the 11th of April 2023, the President on the 28th of March 2023, and Ms. Msika on the 11th of April 2023. What is clear, both from the information and evidence gathered from the President, Mr. Ndlovu and Mr. Van Vellag on the one hand, and the evidence of Mr. Hasim on the other, is that there were conditions precedent attached to the transaction. Based on its mandate, the Financial Surveillance Department focused its consideration with regard to the versions on the question of whether a right to foreign currency had accrued to Ntabanyoni estates, which entitled it to sell or procure the sale of foreign currency within the meaning of Exchange Control Regulation 6.1. Financial Surveillance Department identified core evidence which remained undisturbed and signaled that Ntabanyoni estates, on the available evidence, did not become entitled to the foreign currency that it received from Mr. Hasim. The core evidence was as follows. Mr. Hasim left money at Parapara Farm as a security deposit to secure the buffaloes. Mr. Ndlovu's evidence that he received foreign currency from Mr. Hasim and gave him, Mr. Hasim, a written note, a handwritten note, to confirm that he received US dollars from him for the purchase of buffaloes. Mr. Ndlovu confirmed that the purchase of the buffalo could not be finalized because he still needed to obtain approval, and thereafter, further processes would be undertaken, such as calling the state vet, checking whether the arrivals were in good health, the animals were in good health, and obtaining the necessary permits to move the animals. The President's account of events was that there could not have been a binding contract of sale until the animals were examined by the necessary state vet and certain matters were complied with, including the completion testing. That account seemed consistent with the description by Mr. Van Vellag of standard industry practice. On the basis of the core evidence and having regard to the SARB's narrow mandate in relation to this matter, it appears that, one, both the buyer, Mr. Hasim, and the seller, Ntabanyoni Estate, intended that certain conditions precedent be fulfilled before there was a finalized sale of buffalo. Two, at the time of the encounter with Mr. Ndlovu, Mr. Hasim told Mr. Ndlovu that he was leaving the money to demonstrate that he was serious about the sale. Three, the foreign currency was stolen before the conditions precedent to the sale could be fulfilled. What were the findings of FinSARB? FinSARB's investigation and approach is not premised on the unquestioning acceptance of the versions placed before the investigators, and that all the truth has been told. It is premised on the need to reach conclusions on the relevant facts before FinServ and to restrict the investigation to the scope and purpose set out in relation to the mandate of the Financial Surveillance Department. The applicability of Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 in this particular matter would depend on whether there existed an unconditional contract for the purchase and sale of buffaloes. Lawyers call this a perfected transaction. It follows that there was such, if it follows that there was such an unconditional contract, an entitlement to the foreign currency on the part of Ntabanyoni Estate would exist, triggering the obligation under Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 for Ntabanyoni Estate to make or cause to be made within 30 days a declaration in writing of such foreign currency to FinServ or to an authorized dealer. Conversely, if there was no perfected transaction, there would not be a legal entitlement by Ntabanyoni Estate to the foreign currency, and therefore Exchange Regulation 6.1 would not apply. Based on the information available to financial surveillance, as well as that the sale was subject to conditions precedent, Financial Surveillance Department is of the considered view that the transaction was not a perfected transaction, which gave rise to the legal entitlement by Ntabanyoni to the foreign currency. It appears from the facts available to FinServ as it related to exchange control, and which have not been contradicted by any other evidence which is available to FinServ, that the obligation under Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 was not triggered on the part of Ntabanyoni Estates upon receipt of the foreign currency from Mr. Asili, a non-resident of the Republic. In the circumstances, there would not be a breach of Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 by Ntabanyoni Estates. Accordingly, FinServ and the South African Reserve Bank, on the facts available to it, cannot conclude that there was a contravention of Exchange Control Regulation 6.1 by either Ntabanyoni Estates or the president for that matter. Let me turn, Chair, because there had been an interest in the actual final report of financial surveillance, and to refer the committee to Section 33 of the South African Reserve Bank Act. In relation to the report, the South African Reserve Bank is constrained by requirements of Section 33 of the South African Reserve Bank Act, which prevents disclosure of, amongst others, any information relating to the affairs of the SARB or any information acquired by directors, officers, or employees of the SARB in the course of his or her participation in the affairs of the SARB. The transgression of the restrictions of the Section 33 is a criminal offense. So if you are asking me to avail the report, you are asking me to commit a criminal offense, which I am not prepared to do. The aforesaid restrictions apply unless disclosure is required before a court of law or under any other law. Let me say, Mr. Chair, Honorable Chair, that over the past 10 years, we had an investigation of just over 6,000 transgressions of the exchange control regulations. In none of all of those cases have we had to release the report, neither did we even have to pronounce whether the regulations have been broken or not. Because this committee last year asked us to come back to it and say whether there had been a transgression or not, that is why we are here to do this presentation. So, Chair, this is where I leave it.
Thanks, Governor, for the report. Members, are there clarity seeking questions? Honorable Manye, Honorable Dr. George. Honorable Nkwankwa, Maswale. Yeah, in that order. Honorable Manye, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Perhaps just to follow up from what Deputy President of the EFF, Commissar Floyd Shombo had said, just to follow up very quickly. Chairperson, firstly, I must express my serious disappointment in the manner in which the Reserve Bank has dealt with this matter. And the disappointment I have is that the Reserve Bank seems to have decidedly taken a narrowest of routes to deal with such an important matter, which has caused South Africa an international embarrassment on this matter, to have the whole president implicated in a situation where money is stuffed in sofas and mattresses is quite embarrassing, Chairperson. And for the Reserve Bank, given the milieu of regulations that the Reserve Bank operates under, for them just to pick one and leave the rest is really concerning, Chairperson. I'm very worried about how the Reserve Bank is conducting its work if this is what it's going to do. For instance, Chairperson, I want to bring to the attention of the Reserve Bank that there is something called financial sector regulation. There's a section there, section 15, subsection 1, which is very clear about what it is that the Reserve Bank needs to do. That section, Chairperson, compels the Reserve Bank to take all reasonable steps to prevent systemic events from occurring, and if systemic event has occurred or is imminent, to mitigate without delay the adverse effects of that systemic event on financial stability, and manage the system event and its effect. I want to argue, Chairperson, that the whole issue of 580,000 US dollars that have found its way into the shores of this country, and with all these wishy-washy explanations that we've been getting, that a systemic event has been triggered, as it were. And if you go to that financial sector regulation, Chairperson, they define the systemic event, and without, I'm not going to educate the Reserve Bank people, they know this better than me, but just for the benefit of even the media people now that are here, that a systemic event is defined in the Financial Sector Regulation Act as, I quote, any event or circumstances that may reasonably be expected to have a substantial adverse effect on the financial system, including an event or circumstances that leads to loss of confidence in the financial system. This is exactly what we have here. We have a situation where thousands of US dollars, if not millions, have entered into the country, and there seems to be no accountability anywhere. If you go to the customs and excise that the governor is pointing us to, they also tell us all kinds of things about confidentiality and all of that. And that is not taking us anywhere. Even the declaration statement that the SARB had issued, that declaration statement was a very ambiguous declaration that did not specifically deal with Phala, did not specifically deal with the foreign currency in question. It simply just dealt globally with whether Ndabanyoni complied with the tax declarations and so on. And all of that can only be based on what Ndabanyoni would have declared. If Ndabanyoni kept that money in the SOFA, it's not in the system, it's not in the bank, it's to there's no way the reserve, there's no way even the SARB would have known about this. But Chairperson, what's good about this in terms of the truth of the matter is that it's common cause that 580,000 at least of the millions that are there, at least this one is acknowledged. There are three sources that have acknowledged this money, that this money entered into the country. And the first one is the businessman himself, Mr. Hasim, has admitted to this. So we can tick a box where Mr. Ramaphosa himself has admitted to this. We can tick a box. The acting public protector is on record saying she has even received receipts as confirmation of the same. So that we have 580 in the country is a matter that all the affected parties have agreed to. The only people that don't seem to know about this are the authorities. SARB has not come out to confirm exactly how this money happened. The Reserve Bank, in fact, the explanation by the Reserve Bank today and following their statement is actually consistent with the letter that they'd written to the economic freedom fighters in August last year, where they said they have asked people from the presidency to give all kinds of information about this. So for us, the fact that they had to ask, it just meant that they don't have this. They don't have this money in their records, as it were, which is a concern. That's why they were asking for it. The Reserve Bank, we argue that they've got the most sophisticated systems. In a minute, the Reserve Bank should know or ought to know what money has come or has left the country. So the fact that they had to go asking the presidency people to say, give us information and all of that, it meant the Reserve Bank didn't know. Now, if today we're also told about imperfect transactions and all of that, is further confirmation that the Reserve Bank actually hasn't got the handle on what's happening with this money. They just hear everybody talking about it, but the Reserve Bank actually hasn't seen the money and all of that, which therefore we're worried that why is it that this whole issue is not concerning the Reserve Bank. We note, Chairperson, that the Reserve Bank doesn't seem to have an issue with the possession, and we never argued in any case about the possession. The issue is the duration of the possession. Let's draw the difference. Not the possession, the duration of the possession. That regulation 6.1, by the way, talk to the duration, as it were. Now we have a President Ramaphosa here that has kept the money for 45 days, and the Reserve Bank doesn't seem concerned about this. So the first question, Chairperson, is this. Why is it that the fact that President Ramaphosa has kept the excessive amount of foreign currency beyond the 30 days, why for 45 days, which is beyond the allowable 30 days, why is it that the Reserve Bank is condoning that? I'm not interested, Chairperson, with the Reserve Bank telling us all kinds of things about the perfections of sales and what have you and all of that. I'm interested in the Reserve Bank that doesn't seem to be worried about a possible money laundering issue here. And the reason I want to introduce the money laundering issue here, Chairperson, is because we also have a report from a Section 89 panel which was headed by no less than a former Chief Justice. The former Chief Justice has alluded to the fact that with the information in his disposal, he is of the view that there could very well be money laundering here. So therefore, why is it, Chairperson, that we have a Reserve Bank that is undermining the report of a former Chief Justice? And that report, by the way, is still standing. There hasn't been any structure. There hasn't been any court of law. There hasn't been any structure that has struck down that report. So that report still stands, as it were. President Ramaphosa tried to have it reviewed and then later changed their mind and all of that. And that report is therefore unchallenged. And that report states, therefore, that there were money laundering issues there. But the Reserve Bank has done absolutely nothing, Chairperson, to pursue the route of investigating money laundering. Now that all of these things are happening, this should all be telltale signs. How can it be that 2 or 3 years later, you have bought so many buffaloes, but you have not collected? In fact, there isn't no buffalo sale here. This is just money laundering. Why is the Reserve Bank not investigating this matter as a money laundering matter is my question. The next question, Chairperson, is this, that does the Reserve Bank, in fact, this is a question that Deputy President Floyd Shivambu has asked. I just want to repeat this question. Are they saying, is the Reserve Bank saying that you can go overseas or whatever and come back with a suitcase full of dollars, keep them in your mattress? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Possession is okay. This is what the Reserve Bank is saying. I'm worried about this, Chairperson. I'm really worried about this because I'm worried about what this will do in the money laundering space. The Reserve Bank doesn't seem particularly worried with people that are hoarding all kinds of cash that is not in the financial system, and yet they are here supposed to be controlling the financial system. I'm worried about this, Chairperson. Lastly, I want, Chairperson, I must say this very slowly. I want to ask the Reserve Bank Governor to state under oath 2 things. One, that he can confirm to South Africa that there were no proceeds of crime. That the money that is there, that is confirmed, is not a proceed of crime. Can the Reserve Bank Governor go under oath and assure South Africa that there were no proceeds of crime, there was no money laundering or any of the sort? Can you go under oath on that? Number one. Number two, shortly after this Phala shenanigan, we were greatly state as a country. Almost shortly after that, we would want to ask the Reserve Bank to again go under oath and confirm that the Phala scandal, those dollars, have got no have not been a factor in the grey listing of the country. Can the Reserve Bank confirm that under oath that is the case? Thank you, Chair. I think those are my questions.
Thanks, Honorable Manya. Dr. George.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thanks very much, Governor, for your presentation. The South African Reserve Bank lies at the heart of our financial system, and we must protect its integrity, and we must ensure that it is functioning effectively. Also, thank you, Governor, for your reply to my letter. It is appreciated. I have 5 questions. The first question. Section 33 of the Reserve Bank Act prohibits directors, officers, and employees of the bank from disclosing information, not the minister. So my question is, was the report made available to a minister, that means any minister, or the president? That is my first question. My second question, you mentioned that Mr. Hazim left the money as a security deposit. Where is the contract, and why was cash taken and not a bank guarantee? And who carried the risk of the dollars? That is my second question. And my third question, did the South African Reserve Bank consider how an entitlement can be contingent as envisaged in Regulation 6.5? And did the Reserve Bank consider the duty in Regulation 6.5 against delaying a contingency from eventuating? You did mention 6.1, but not 6.5. So that was my third question. My fourth question is, did the South African Reserve Bank consider the impact its reasoning could have on money laundering and how persons can avoid declaring foreign currency by simply stipulating conditions in a contract? That is my fourth question. And then my final question. Has any action been taken previously against any individual or entity, even though a transaction had not been perfected? That is my fifth question. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Maswale.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair. Can I proceed?
Yes.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks again from the Governor for the report. It would appear on the strength of the facts they have in their possession that there wasn't a transaction that was perfected. Well, you can live with that. Perhaps my question is related to perhaps the third part of Mr. George, Honorable George's questions in respect of the amount of money that exchanged hands between Mr. Ndlovu and Mr. Hazim. Pardon me if I'm not pronouncing or calling it appropriately. It would appear to me that would constitute a commencement of a process. However, that process was never concluded. In the light of what has transpired, I think the theft, etc., I'm not sure if it would be their call to make, but would it not be reasonable to then conclude that that exchange shouldn't have taken place? For it carried with it some implications, because foreign currency then exchanged hands and it was kept, and there is an obligation that ensues pursuant to acquiring a foreign currency. I'm just checking whether, with hindsight, it would have been inappropriate for that to have taken place, or perhaps it could have been represented in other forms, other instruments to constitute this intent to procure in the final analysis. I just don't know. I mean, given that then what transpired is what we read about, the theft as one of them, was it advisable, or would it have been the most appropriate, or what law then prevails in such a situation? Because certainly from somebody, a would-be purchaser and a would-be seller, they exchange money before the actual transaction is complete, in the sense. It does appear to me, relying on this latter part, conditions precedent, it shouldn't absolve treating that exchange in its specific circumstances. It's just a comment and question. I'd like the governor and the team to probably just fill in. It may help to clear the air so that there isn't a sense that could be construed to suggest that there could be other attempts to try and wash some of these underneath. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Masole. Honorable Kwangwa.
Chairperson, I detest it with passion generally when people come to us and they treat us like we're stupid. We are anything but stupid. For an example, this thing, the intention here is to, I don't know what, Bubsela or Chairperson, cloaked in regulations and nice English, but this is unadulterated claptrap, if you ask me. For an example, Dr. George is quite correct in saying, if you had experience of trading on the African continent and other parts of the world, all you have to do is to provide a bank guarantee to show that you have enough money in your account to be able to take care of that transaction. The bank guarantee actually assures the seller of the product that you have the money and you're a serious buyer, right? You ask anyone who trades in petroleum, in the petroleum industry, in the sector, especially when it comes to the volumes of the amount of money that we're talking about. It's nonsense, or it's actually an insult. It's insulting our intelligence to say, because no bank guarantee was done, no formal processes were followed. Therefore, as the governor of the Reserve Bank is saying, it's okay for the money to be stuffed in the mattresses and whatnot. Usually when money is stuffed in mattresses because you're evading tax, it's money laundering, it's all the other issues that are illegal, of an illegal nature. You cannot hide money that is intended for legal transactions because you know you have tax liabilities. So to claim that it's okay because some people said some claptrap, which you can't prove. We can't prove it because there is the same Reserve Bank cannot make the report public. Then how do we test their rationale? How do we test their thinking around how the rationale behind the decisions they made? Secondly, their interpretation of the law, right? Because remember, the central bank is staffed with economists. They never agree on any issue. They always say on the other hand. It's the same applies to lawyers, for example. They would interpret different sections of legislation differently. And now we need to be able to have access to that report, apply our minds to it, and also have our legal teams actually looking into the report and agreeing whether or not their interpretation of these sections makes sense. What happens here, what seems to be happening here, I don't care about asking questions, Chairperson, because there's no need to ask questions. This whole thing is a whitewash. It's a cover-up. Is to say that we want to be able to actually, the president of the UDM wrote on the 22nd of August asking to have access to the report. And quite correctly, the Reserve Bank cited sections of legislations that make it impossible for them to release the report. But we're not dealing with just any Tom, Dick, and Harry. We're not dealing with Ngabom Zikwango and other people who are ordinary members of the public here. We're dealing with the head of state that stuffed money in so far as another hiding money, in essence, engaged in money laundering, if one were to look at the evidence around this issue, and kept the money beyond what is required in terms of the regulations, which is 30 days. And now we want to treat it like it's a normal, it's a normal what doesn't deal with the extent of the amount of money that was in the possession of the president, who in his right mind, Chairperson, would give you money before the transaction is perfected. If you were to consider just from a sales point of view, I have a sales background, it is the responsibility of the seller to make sure that everything else is done before the sale is perfected. Why? Am I stupid? Why would I give you my money, $500 for a sales that is yet to be perfected, even if you were to follow it legally? You must first follow the steps, make sure that all the steps are followed, before I pay you the deposit. Otherwise, what am I paying you the deposit for? Are we stupid? We can't pay you the deposit if you have not met the conditions are the responsibility of the seller and not the responsibility of the person who brought in the money. And we're not answering the critical question, how did the money come into the country? And is it okay, really, I think the question which was asked by Honorable Shivambu earlier, and which later was also asked by Honorable Manyi, is that is it okay for people to keep money for as long as they want? Because then it means that it will depend on between me and the seller to determine as to when I can disclose the funds. Then what is the purpose of the law? It renders the whole legal framework and the regulatory framework that we have in place useless. If it's then going to be up to the members of the public to determine when as to when they can disclose when they're in possession of the foreign currency, I can take 5 years, I can take 10 years, I can take 10 to 20 years, because the conditions will always be industry specific. But the law should actually look at the median, would look at the average, the middle, to say what is reasonable in terms of disclosure. We can't leave it up to Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of the republic, and the other chap who came to the country with foreign currency, and we don't even know how he came into the country with this foreign currency. We don't even know why the money was kept for such a long period without it being disclosed. But the worst part of it, which annoys a great deal out of me, it really drives me up the wall, is that the Reserve Bank says we've conducted an investigation, but we can't test the application of the law. We can't test the rationale behind the decisions that have been made. We can't say anything. In fact, we have applied for PIA primarily because of the response they gave to us, because we want to be able to test their reasoning. We want to be able to test the application of the law. Without that, it means we're living in a banana republic. And you see how the Reserve Bank has actually dealt with this thing, actually dents its reputation to a large extent. You might disagree with the Reserve Bank from an ideological point of view and a policy point of view, but they've done relatively well. But on this thing, they've been dismal, I must be honest. And the last issue is, when it comes to ordinary South Africans, and how authorities deal with money laundering issues or allegations against them. I know people whose accounts have been frozen because of simple allegations or thought that they might be engaging in money laundering. But it's easy for people because some are more equal before the law. It's easy for them to get away with this issue. It's easy for us to actually say, no, abdicate responsibility to other institutions and say, this should have been done elsewhere, right? But what is the point then of doing a comprehensive investigation on this particular question? If an institution that is as credible, if it was not as credible and reputable as the Reserve Bank, can abdicate responsibility and say, we don't care how the money came into this country, and yet they are here for financial regulation issues and to ensure price stability, but they don't care about how the money came into the country. They did not actually even inquire as to how the money came into the country, why it was kept in the sofas. The only thing there is a legal nicety of saying, technically, was the transaction perfected? It means other sectors of our economy can say, it takes actually 15 years to perfect a transaction for us. And that is how long the Reserve Bank must wait before we can be able to declare. It's nonsense. The law is supposed to create minimum standards for everyone to comply with. If they don't comply with that, they are supposed to answer. Now we hear that it's 18 months, it's however long those two contracting parties can decide. What kind of country enters into that, where we depend on the contracting parties and there are no minimum requirements? It's claptrap. We're being made stupid. And I hate it when people appear before Parliament and they pretend as if we don't have gray matter in our heads. Actually, we know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Wankwa, Honorable Skosana, and then Honorable Shivambu.
No, thank you very much, and greetings to all the members and representatives from SARS and Prudential Authority, as led by the governor. Yeah, my apology, Chair, for not showing my video. I was affected by load shedding, so I had to shift to the nearest area. So I've just parked on the side of the room. So the environment is not conducive for me to show my video. Yeah, no, Chair, we welcome the report of SARS in relation to this matter of Phala Phala. I think it's good that this report is presented before us as Parliament for our benefit, but also for the benefit of the public. Because the public, I think, it has a serious interest on this particular matter. So I think we really appreciate the fact that today this report is brought before us so that we are able to be empowered and also to ask questions, but also for the public to really understand what is happening regarding this matter. I think the presentation is quite clear in terms of the scope of the investigation that was undertaken by FinSARB, that the investigation dealt only with the alleged contravention of exchange control regulations in relation to the foreign currency allegedly stolen from Phala Farm on the 9th of February 2020. I think that's the scope. So when we read this report, we must read it in relation to the scope and say, based on the scope of the investigation, does the report really speak to the scope? Because obviously, if the scope is limited, you wouldn't expect a report that goes beyond that particular scope. It means also the report, the final report of the investigation, will also be limited to the scope. And I think as members, I think we're aware that there are other authorities like law enforcement agencies that are also doing investigation on the matter of Phala Farm, because a case, a criminal case was opened in relation to this matter. So you would have obviously law enforcement agencies who are investigating this matter, and I think on their part they will obviously have a broader scope to look at a number of things if there are criminal activities, etc., etc. But in relation to SARB, I think the scope was limited to the issue of contravention of exchange control regulations. So as we read the report, we must read it in line with that, not unless we are saying our view maybe as the committee that the scope should have been a little bit broader, maybe to look at the issues of money laundering and what. Maybe I think that's the part I think the Reserve Bank should respond on, as to say on the matters that they've placed before the FinSARB to investigate. Don't they think that they could have looked at other points in terms of when you look at the mandate of SARB? But from where we are sitting now, based on the scope that was given to FinSARB, I think the report, in my view, speaks to that. And obviously, if you do investigation, I think you do investigation based on the information that is at your disposal, the information that is placed before you as an investigator, and the information that you are able to access as you do your investigation. Because there's information that was placed before them, and they had to contact people that were affected, your Mr. Ndlovu, your Mr. Hassim, His Excellency the President, and so forth. So then they gathered all this information. Now, based on the information they gathered from all the affected parties, then they arrived at this particular conclusion. So I think for us or for anybody to challenge this report, it can only be if you can provide more information that was not placed before the people who were doing the investigation, to say, no, you were, in terms of your scope, yes, you're correct, but if you were correct in terms of your scope, but still we think that there's an information that you did not look at, because obviously you can't look at the information that you don't have. So if somebody is having information and that information is not put before you, it can only help if the person with more information that is not at your disposal as a person who's conducting business, if that person can then bring that information, that can perhaps influence the investigators to arrive at a different conclusion. But in this case, I think they've arrived at this conclusion based on the information that was at their disposal, information that was placed before them, and the information that they took steps to go and find. So that's how they arrived at this. So I think there are two things for me. One is the issue of the scope. I think we need to then check with the South African Reserve Bank as to whether couldn't they have expanded the scope, because as I'm listening to members on I think that the issue of the scope of investigation, that's one. But two, looking if the scope they couldn't go beyond the scope based on the information that was at their disposal, then we can't blame them, but we can only blame people who, in fact, we cannot blame anybody, but we can only say if there are people who've got other information that was not put before FinSARB when they were doing investigation. I think such people, I think, should then come forward and say, no, but we think we've got this particular information that could have assisted, and we think please consider this information, because this report is based only on the information that was at the disposal of FinSARB. So if a person present a case and say, this is my case, if I dispute that case, I think the onus is on me, I think, to provide a contrary information to say, no, this case is not like this, it is like this. But if I'm unable to provide a contrary information, I think it will be difficult for me to say, no, what you are presenting is incorrect. So, Chair, for me, I think let's accept the report, but let the Reserve Bank just explain, just respond on the aspect of the scope, that couldn't they have perhaps broadened the scope to look at other things that are financial in nature, not things that are not financial. Obviously, those things can only be dealt with by other law enforcement agents. But in relation to issues of financial money laundering, couldn't they have perhaps look at that? Because I think it's more of an outcry from members when I'm listening to thank you very much, Chair.
Siyathokoza Mhlonishwa Sikhosana, Honorable Shivambu.
No, thank you very much, Chair. There are certain things which are basic common cause. One is that there were crimes that were committed in Palapala with the knowledge and participation of the sitting head of state, Mr. Ramaphosa. And this is demonstrated by the simple fact that even when there was theft of these dollars in Palapala, there was no police case open. Instead, an unlawful process was followed to chase after those who stole the money there. A lot of resources of the South African Police Service were utilized, including helicopters, including cross-border law enforcement, which happened outside the purview of the law, to chase for dollars which were taken from the president's farm. That is unlawful in terms of what they got to happen. And they seem to be now a systematic and systemic cover-up, which started with the public protector or the acting public protector and the South African Revenue Services, which narrowly focused on what are the issues that could have been areas of violation. And now the South African Reserve Bank is joining into the band of cover-up and producing this whitewash report to try to cover up what got to happen in Palapala, and thinking that we as members of parliament are just fools that must just accept this absolute rubbish. As a matter of fact, the only currency for legal tender in South Africa is the rand. What that means is that you cannot utilize any other currency for any transaction here. There are countries which permit other currencies that they can be utilized in their own countries, particularly the ones here in the customs unions in Eswatini, in Namibia, and in Lesotho. But in South Africa, we do not have the permissibility to exchange goods and services utilizing any other currency except the rand, because you can easily create a parallel market, a parallel economy of a different currency which is not detected, which is not taxable in terms of what is expected out of our legal framework in the manner in which it is. The Reserve Bank is purposefully and engaged in the malicious compliance of narrowing their investigation so that they could exonerate the sitting head of state and present a case that there was nothing wrong committed there. And that is absolute nonsense. It undermines not only the integrity of the South African Reserve Bank, but also of the individuals that are leading the South African Reserve Bank. I would think, Chair, that as part of what we should look into as the Standing Committee on Finance is what are the mechanisms of removing a sitting governor of the Reserve Bank from office, particularly for this report, for deliberately trying to subvert the laws of this country and not engage in an honest manner in which we could have protected the integrity of our financial systems, of the foreign currency regulations, of the usage of the rand, which the governor and the Reserve Bank has got an obligation to protect. I think that this actually even goes beyond just the cover-up. We need to take action ourselves against the individuals who are involved in the whole of this issue. Because one of the issues, the questions that we must ask is to, which port of entry did Mr. Hazim use to bring this foreign currency? Which airport, which border, which seaport, which port was used to bring this currency into South Africa, and what happened in terms of declarations, and why is the South African Reserve Bank indifferent to it? One of the things which Mr. Lesicha must be aware of is that you are not going to be in that office, even if we do not succeed in removing you now, even if you do not voluntarily resign now, you are not going to be in that office forever. We're going to lead that institution in the foreseeable future, and you're still going to be alive, you're still going to be held accountable. Don't allow to be used to take decisions that are not sustainable, which we can easily prove wrong, and demonstrate to the people of South Africa that this was a nonsensical cover-up in terms of what happened. Don't take us for fools. We know the laws of this country. You're not the only person who knows how the laws of this country operate and how they are framed. So let's Chair, concretely start our own investigations as well as to the cover-up of the South African Reserve Bank, so that we can nip in the bud a situation where institutions of the state are utilized for wrong purposes, for cover-ups, because if the state institutions are covering up, they then disable us as Parliament to provide the constitutional obligation of oversight. I think we need to take action against the South African Reserve Bank and those who are leading it now, so that there is finality on this matter that is clear without any confusion that arises out of it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Honorable Shwam. Governor and your team, can you respond to the questions asked by members?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to start with the following. We treat our mandate seriously. As the governor, with the deputy governors, we kept an arm's length from the investigation. We allowed our investigators latitude. We availed them massive resources, both internally and externally. They sought external legal resources. We availed those. They traveled asking for information, and they got to the bottom of it. They tabled the report to us as the executives of the bank, and we accepted it. We sought outside legal counsel on the report. We asked questions, and we got satisfied that our team acted professionally, with integrity, and they acted independently and without fear, favor, or prejudice. That is what we expected them to do. They did that. That is by way of the introduction. Mr. Manyi raises a question about section 15.1, which he had actually read. Section 15.1 talks about systemic events and a systemic risk to the banking system. The investigation that we are dealing with Everybody had been saying this thing. The money didn't go through the banking system. So that doesn't even arise. Once again, our responsibility in this investigation had to do with the possible violation of exchange control regulations. And as Honorable Skosana raised, whether we were too narrow with the scope, and others also said that we were narrow with the scope. Yes, we were. But when we say we are narrow with the scope, it's because we focused on the laws that we administer. We do not administer the Customs Act. So Honorable Shivambo asked the question, at which port of entry has this money come through? We're not responsible for the ports of entry. It is Home Affairs and SARS. And SARS has already pronounced on the declaration or otherwise of this money. That is not the responsibility of the Reserve Bank, and we are not going there. It might feel like we should have done something broader. No, we do not have the power that the customs officials have, and so we cannot get there. It is the responsibilities of the government. Yes, I know that SARS and SARB sounds very close in terms of the way in which it's said, and I think that in a couple of times these things get confused. But SARS is responsible for customs. They had pronounced on the tax issues and on the customs issues with respect to the declaration of this money, and it is not for the bank to get there. You know, I mean, Samani talks about somebody carrying suitcases. We can't answer speculative questions. We can't even try and speculate how this money came through. All that we know is that if this money had to come through the port of entry, it would have to be declared to the customs officials. And whether it was declared to the customs officials or not, SARS has already pronounced on that, and I would refer members to answer to SARS for that confirmation. Mr. Manyi asks me to confirm that there were no proceeds of crime. We were not investigating a crime. We were investigating the possible violation of exchange controls. There are institutions in our society tasked with the responsibility to investigate crime. The Reserve Bank is not such. If there is anybody investigating, the relevant authorities is investigating crime and is looking for information from the Reserve Bank, in accordance with the law, we will cooperate with them in accordance with the law. It is not our responsibility to investigate crime. Could we confirm that this thing didn't lead to grey listing? Honorable Manyi, the FATF report is public, and it has spelled out the areas where there are deficiencies in our system and that they must be remediated. That is what is official. That is what FATF has pronounced on. And I think as a country, we must take that report from FATF with the gaps that have been identified and work selflessly to make sure that we come off the grey listing. Honorable George, integrity is very important, and that is why I had to state this thing, that my team acted with integrity. They acted independently, without fear, favor, or prejudice. I have got no reason to doubt them. And actually, I expect nothing less from anyone working in the Reserve Bank, including myself. Section 33, prohibition, and whether we have shared this thing with the Minister of Finance. No, we haven't shared it with the Minister of Finance. We have not shared this report with the President. We have not shared the report even with the President lawyers. They do not have it because Section 33 applies to them too. So the President lawyers, the President, the Minister of Finance, they do not have access to this report. And there was a question of where is the contract, was there the contract. In the report, we deal with what we have and the information that is there, and I guess that the president might be asked, Mr. President, there was this transaction. Was there a contract? And I suppose that we could deal with this here. The question, Mr. George, of the impact of our reasoning on the money laundering through conditions and so forth. Yes, I mean, I think that we had seen that there'd been speculation that people can just do these things and invent conditions. But in a way, you also deal with this thing, Mr. George, when you refer us to Section 6.5, because Section 6.5 says, if you are entitled or you have got conditions that have to be met before you could receive the money, you have got to almost show cause that you didn't ensure that the conditions are not fulfilled so that the money should not be received. And I will ask Mr. Navutanda at some stage to just walk you through the section once I am done with this thing. And the previous actions on transactions, and again, we can talk about this, but we do not comment on any of the previous investigations. And what I had given you, it is possible that in those 6,000 transactions that we had previously investigated, there might be one of that sort, but that is not something that one had gotten into. Mr. Maswale raised the issue of the appropriateness of the exchange. And this also links to what Honorable Kwakwa said about why a bank guarantee was not used, why cash. That is not for us to answer. That is for the buyer and the seller to answer. Why did they decide that the appropriate way of doing it is through cash and not through a bank guarantee or not through an EFT or some bank transfer of some sort? That is not for us to deal with. And you asked the question, how did the money come into the country? Once again, it is a customs matter. And SARS had pronounced what their stance was on this as the administrators of the Customs and Excise Act. And should we have expanded the scope? No, we couldn't expand the scope. You see, there isn't a shortage of institutions that had overstepped their mandates and tried and do things that they are not empowered in terms of the law, and the courts have dealt with them harshly. And the Reserve Bank was not about to step out of its mandate because for some reason it is appealing that we go and do these things. And ditto, because the question about the crime and process of crime might suggest maybe money laundering had taken place. That is not for us. If there is money laundering that had taken place, it's for the Financial Intelligence Center and the Hawks to deal with those issues. Our responsibility with respect to money laundering has to do with the institutions we supervise, and that responsibility ends with whether the institutions we supervise have got policies, procedures, and systems in place to combat their institutions being abused by launderers. The transaction we are talking about here, from the facts we have, it didn't go through the banking system. On the version of the Mr. Hassim, he brought this money. Was it supposed to be declared at the port of entry? Was it declared? That's a customs matter, not a sub matter. And so I will leave that. There, and so if there are crimes there, the law enforcement authorities must deal with that. And Honorable Shibambo says that only the currency of the Republic, only the rand must be traded with. Mr. Shibambo, I refer you to Regulation 8.1 of the Exchange Control Regulations. And it says that the Treasury shall from time to time pronounce on which currencies should be used in the transactions. Such a pronouncement was done by the Treasury in 1961. And the pronouncement said, South Africans who export must invoice in a currency other than the South African rand. So if you are a South African exporter, you do not export an invoice in rand, you invoice in foreign currency. The settlement can end up taking place in rand, but you must invoice in foreign currency. That is Regulation 8.1 of the Exchange Control Regulations. And underline that, if you are exporting, so I cannot start transacting with another South African in dollars. It says if you are exporting, and I hope that that makes it clear. I think I have dealt with this, Charlie. If you could just go through section 6.5 once again, and also confirm that what I was saying with respect to Regulation 8.1 is correct. But I think that I have read this before, and I think that it is the correct interpretation. So just to make sure that that is done. With your permission, Chair, I would like to ask Mr. Charles Novutanda, who is the acting head of the Financial Surveillance Department, to come in.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members, Parliament Committee. Thank you, Governor. You are correct. Section 6.5 is very clear. It prohibits anyone who's entitled to receive payment in foreign currency from engaging in any conduct that is aimed at frustrating or delaying the receipt of such currency. And as part of the investigation as articulated by the Governor, we from FinServ couldn't find any evidence to suggest that such activities were engaged by the parties that we are focusing on today. Furthermore, we refer this section 6.5 to our legal advice, both inside the bank and outside the bank, and it confirmed that indeed 6.5 is not applicable in this regard. I thank you.
Charles, 8.1.
So can I now move to the Regulation 8.1? That is linked to what the honorable member, Mr. Shibambo, was engaging on whether you can trade in foreign currency in South Africa. And that question, it will depend on the nature of the transaction and to the parties that are involved. Let me start with the SA engaging with non-resident. So it's a SA resident that is exporting his product to a non-resident. Regulation 8 and the Gazette, the notice of Gazette that was issued in 1961 prescribed that we should receive a foreign currency. We'll also go a step further that you can also receive rent from a non-resident account. So there are two ways that as a non-resident you can pay you can pay your exports. So it's foreign currency from your account everywhere, from your account from offshore, or you can use rent from non-resident account. So that is the transaction between SA resident and non-residents. So the second scenario is the transition between SA resident and SA resident. We always say that you can invoice one another in foreign currency, but settlement must always be in range. I thank you, Chairperson.
Chair, I think we have dealt with all the questions that were posed. Yeah.
Okay, let me check. Are there questions further that members want to ask, further clarity-seeking questions? Honorable George, Dr. George, Honorable Manye.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Governor, for your responses. I just want to follow up on question number 2 regarding the contract. I wasn't quite clear on what you were saying. I wanted to know, where is the contract? If I understood correctly, you said that the president could be asked for it. So what I want to know is, did you ask for that contract? Did you ask for the contract? And or are you planning to ask for that contract? So that's the first follow-up question. And then the other second follow-up question was, I think you partially responded to it, but my question was this, question 4. Did the South African Reserve Bank consider the impact its reasoning could have on money laundering and how persons can avoid declaring foreign currency by simply stipulating conditions in a contract? Now, I understand your reply on 6.5 that, you know, there is a regulation regarding that, so that delays wouldn't arise or couldn't arise. But I want to ask that specifically, is that, did you consider the impact your reasoning would have on money laundering and how persons can avoid declaring foreign currency by simply stipulating conditions in a contract? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Manye. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. You know, I can only say this in isiZulu. Ukuthi uGovernor uqashe emva kwesithupha. I don't know this in any other language, not even in my Xhosa language. But uGovernor uqashe emva kwesithupha. Chairperson, correct. In fact, maybe then let's accept that the Reserve Bank is not an expert in interpretation of the law, that we might have to take this to court for a proper declaration of the meaning of some of these clauses, as it were. If you look at the Regulation 15, subsection 1 of the Financial Sector Regulation Act that deals with the issue of systemic risk, the governor has chosen to look at what is within the system to respond to the issue that is there. This is almost like if you have a minister of housing that is going to only worry about those who've been allocated houses, and then those that are in the squatter camps, and say, those are not my responsibility. My responsibility is for people that are already in the houses that the particular legislature has, or rather executive has allocated. This is how narrow the governor is responding to this question. The issue here, Governor, is that things outside the system can affect the system and cause systemic risk. If you have money laundering, if you have a parallel system that is happening outside the banking system, we have a problem. This is why, in fact, I was reading in the media recently, some person was caught with I don't know how much money, and that person had to be arrested. Why is that person arrested if it's not an issue to be in possession of the money? Not only in possession in this case is the issue that you don't want to respond to is the duration of the possession. You seem to be quiet about this. And I'm worried about this, Chairperson, because when the governor likes the governor put it on record that this is the money that was not in the banking system. So therefore, why are we even dealing with this as the governor? Why didn't the governor simply say this looks like a money laundering issue, and he makes a recommendation that the Hawks, can you please investigate this? Because if I check on my system, I can't find. And as I said, in their letter of August 2022, the governor had said this money, the governor had asked presidency to give information, which clearly shows the money is not in the system. So I think they were all at idem about the fact that the money is not in the system. And indeed, we know it was in the sofas and everything and everywhere else, but not in the system. And therefore, the declaration by SARS, it's in itself actually a misleading declaration, because that declaration talks to the money in the system. The issue we're dealing with here is not money in the system, because the first statement of SARS in the first instance was that they could not find this money in their own systems, as it were, and then later, what's the right word? They opportunistically chose their words very carefully about money, about the declaration of Ntabanyoni affairs, which might very well be correct within the system. The issue we're dealing with here is the parallel system, which everybody is alluding to but not talking to. The Reserve Bank, when they talk about unperfected transactions, they talk about things outside the system. The issue we're dealing with, the Chairperson, are things that are outside the system, which the authorities are aware of, but the authorities are busy giving us a whitewash because they're busy focusing us on the system. And they're saying, as far as with the information at our disposal, what is information at that disposal is what the system tells them. But why are they looking at the system when the money is not in the system, is in the SOFA? You're looking at the wrong place. Now, if the money is at the SOFA, why is the Reserve Bank even pronouncing on 6.1 as if the money is in the system when the money is in the SOFA? And if the money is in the SOFA, and the Reserve Bank has got evidence that the money is in the country, but it's not clicking in the customs, therefore it is in the country illegally. If the money is in the country for more than 45 days, why is the Reserve Bank not worried that there is a stash of money that is in Phala that has not been brought through the dealer or National Treasury or the Treasury as the regulation stipulates? Why is the Treasury so indifferent about this? This is actually the concern that we have, Chairperson, that now we have Reserve Bank that is now busy with all kinds of excuses for Mr. Ramaphosa to say, no, he was not entitled to it and all of this. What nonsense is this that we're actually hearing here? Not entitled to this. A person that has issued a receipt and an authority, public protector, has confirmed that there was a receipt, and the public protector, acting public protector, is on record saying there is no doubt that the sale has happened. So it's common cause that there's money in the country, there's foreign currency in the country. All we have is the institutions that must deal with the accountability of this money that are busy ducking and diving and doing everything else but dealing with this matter. So, Chairperson, I just want to put on record further to what Honorable Shibambo had said, that we don't accept this explanation by the Reserve Bank at all. In fact, it's indeed a whitewash, this explanation, and the Reserve Bank has decided to use a tool, a very narrow tool within the whole toolbox that they have to deal with this matter. There is nothing within the Reserve Bank mandates that when there's money laundering, that the Reserve Bank should not be concerned. The word money laundering appears in a whole lot of the regulations of the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank has got to be nervous if there's money laundering, even if the money laundering is not within the system, it's in suitcases. Even if the money laundering is in sofas, the Reserve Bank must be concerned, because all of that undermines the financial systems, which is their mandate. Now, why is the Reserve Bank relegating its mandate and running away from its mandate? The Financial Services Regulation Act deals with the issue of ensuring the integrity of the financial systems. And we would argue here, Chairperson, that money in the SOFAs is undermining the system that the Reserve Bank is worried about. Why is the Reserve Bank wanting to confine us to money only in the system when we've got it in the SOFAs? So, Chairperson, this is really totally unacceptable. We just have to be very clear about this. And I think perhaps we need to reconvene as the committee to interrogate this matter any further. And I also want to make another recommendation, Chairperson, while we at it on this matter, that the South African Revenue Services must also be called again to come and deal with the matter and give and be a much more granular about this so-called declaration, which they issued a statement about, because we are of the view in the EFF that even that declaration was a misleading declaration, the declaration of things that have got absolutely nothing to do with the money in the SOFA issue. They must come and create a connection and show us if that was that all those that foreign currency is what is contained in the declaration. Our contention that is that it's not actually contained. They have decided to do exactly what the Reserve Bank is doing here, to contain to restrict themselves on what is in the system, knowing very well that the system is not going to reflect anything because the money is not in the system, the money is in the SOFA. Thank you, Chairperson.
Enkos, Governor, can you please respond so that we can draw towards a conclusion?
Yes, I am married to a Zulu woman, but the Zulu expression that Honorable Manyi used is beyond my comprehension, so I will not be able to assist him with that. Follow-up questions here, and I like Mr. Manyi's suggestion that you call SARS, because you see, he's accusing us of acting narrowly. He's accusing SARS of acting narrowly. So everybody seems to be acting narrowly, but we can only apply the law that we administer. That is what we do. And then he again talks about money laundering. If there's money laundering that is taking place outside, again, I've stated this for the record. It is for the FIC and the law enforcement authorities. It is not for the SARB. The SARB's responsibility ends with the institutions that we oversee, and whether they have got systems, procedures, and policies in place to comply with the Financial Intelligence Sector Act, and thus being able to combat money laundering. And so that is where I would indeed. Are we repurposing our investigation to be fitting into the system? No, Mr. Manyi. We are applying the law as given to us. We are applying the law as passed by this parliament, and the regulations attendant to it. And you say that there are other people who might interpret the law precisely. Well, you know, in the end, we might all interpret. If there is a contestation about the interpretability of the law, there is only one institution tasked with the responsibility to manage that contestation, and it's our courts. And if they start disagreement, I suppose it can be dealt with. Honorable George, I am hesitant to say, because you are asking whether there was a contract. For something to be binding, even an invoice would be seen as a contract. A receipt could be seen as a contract. On the version that we have, Mr. Hasim said he left the money as a security deposit. And there was a note that he got from Mr. Ndlovu. and I will leave it. I will leave it there. In terms of whether our reasoning would have an impact, and of course, given our standing, everything that we say, people treat seriously. Let me be clear here that we do not believe that what we have done has got implications for money laundering. It might have, but we dealt with the interpretation of the law with respect to the exchange controls. And maybe one of these days, the financial intelligence sector might be able to pronounce on this. But if indeed the perception ends up being that, oh, it's okay to launder money, yeah, it would be a very unfortunate interpretation of what we have said. Deputy Governors Council I think I have dealt with the things. Is there anything that I have missed, or maybe I misspoke and you would like to correct me? We all good? Honorable Chair, I think we have dealt with all the questions.
Okay. I think we have to come to the close of this meeting. Because I don't see any further clarity-seeking question or follow-up questions, so that we come to the end of this meeting. Thanks very much, Governor, and thanks very much, honorable members, in the manner that we have dealt with this matter. You will remember that last year, 2022, when there was a public debate about the issue of Parapara, Honorable Dr. George and Honorable Shivambu brought this matter to the attention of the committee, that as a standing committee finance, we should investigate this matter and find out what actually happened. Because we don't have the capability. You will remember at that time also the Speaker has set up an independent panel to deal with this matter. Other issues we refer to that panel, but there were specific issues that members wanted the Reserve Bank to attend to. On the 6th of June, 2022, I wrote a letter as the chairperson of this committee to the governor, requesting him as the governor heading that institution to attend to issues that are being raised by honorable members. And it took more than a year and 2 months for the Reserve Bank to come back to us. And according to what they say, is that they have looked at their scope and the mandate of the bank in relation to the issue that was being investigated, and delegated the matter to a body called FinServ, which dealt with the alleged contravention of the exchange control regulation, in particular regulation 6.1, and whether there was a contravention in that regard. And according to them, they have made findings and came to a particular conclusion. And the findings that they have arrived at was that based on the information available, the transaction was not a perfected transaction. Therefore, SARB, that is the Reserve Bank, could not conclude that there was a contravention of Regulation 6, subsection 1 by the Ntabanyoni estates or the president. And also, according to the South African Reserve Bank Act, section 33, they can't disclose their report to any member of the public because there is a disclosure act, section in that regard that prevent them to disclose certain categories of reports. And the governor has cited almost 6,000 reports that were in the custody of the bank, which they could not disclose to any member of the public. So in this regard, even this report, section 33 applies. It can't be exempted in that regard. So I think what we have to agree is that the Reserve Bank has complied with the mandate that we have given them last year on the 6th of June, 2022. If ever there are other issues that have to do with the financial sector, conduct authority, FIC, SARS, is something else which the Reserve Bank can be held accountable for, because they have got their own specific mandate in regard to the SARB Act. And in this regard, they had to deal with Section 33. So if members are not satisfied, I think, because some of the questions that we're asking, money laundering is an FIC responsibility. It's not the responsibility of SARB in this regard, and other law enforcement agencies. So let's agree that the Reserve Bank has done what we have requested them to do last year on the 6th of June in the matter of Para, and conclude this meeting in that manner. Because that's what the Reserve Bank have done, and nothing more, nothing less. If ever there are other issues that have to do with FIC, FIC also report to this committee. Financial Sector Conduct Authority also report to this committee. So if we are saying that there are other matters that have to do with those bodies, let's refer the issues to those organs of state. But in this, I think the Reserve Bank has done what we have requested them to do.
Chair.
Yes, Honorable Shwam.
No, I don't include us on that summary, please. Please note our fundamental and like big objection to your summary. We do not think that the Reserve Bank did what we expected it to do. We are the ones, by the way, as the EFF, who wrote the Reserve Bank to say that this must be investigated. And we do not think that they've done, they narrowed their scope to do their own thing. So if you want to have that, it's your own conclusion. Please count us out of that summary. We're not part of that.
Okay, taken, Honorable Shwam. Honorable Nkwankwa.
Well, Chair, Honorable Shivambu was actually quite right that some of us would not be taking the Reserve Bank to court on the basis of their report if we agreed that they followed the process correctly and that their findings are in line with what we expected. Yeah, their findings might not be in line with what expected, but the process followed up until we reached the conclusion. We vehemently disagree with it. So I think the conclusion must not actually bind other parties who are challenging the process. Thank you.
Of course, Honorable Nkwankwa. Honorable Manye.
Yeah, Chairperson, just in conclusion, just to say, I think it will be very misleading for the summary to take it as a common cause that the Reserve Bank has got nothing to do with money laundering. It's not true. The whole issue of FATF and the responsibilities that the Reserve Bank have is to prevent money laundering. That's the whole point. And therefore, for the Reserve Bank to try and positive view here that they've got nothing to do with money laundering, it's a misleading contention. In fact, they must rephrase that. They've got serious mandate to prevent money laundering. As it were, it might be once it's been discovered, it might be referred elsewhere. But for them to wash their hands and say when it's money laundering, it's other people, it's not true. Simply not true. And therefore, I concur with the summary by Deputy President of the EFF that your summary is actually also misleading, Chairperson. Don't, even for members that are not even for the EFF members, I think you need to draw a distinction between having complied and having responded. I think your summary should say they have responded to whatever inquiry, but where they've complied, it's a call that must be made differently. So, Chairperson, beyond the EFF in this meeting, we are also misrepresenting other members by saying it's complied. That's a question that requires a different interrogation. Whether they've responded, yes, we all agree they've responded. But whether they've complied, it's a matter that is contested. I think your summary should, despite the fact that all of you are ANC, but I think your summary must be neutral, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Honorable Manya. ANC in this regard are members of this committee. I don't think you are including those who come from the bank. I was saying that in regard to what we have requested them to do last year, June, I believe they've actually carried out that task. And as I've said, that if we are not happy with certain issues contained in what they have reported, there are other organs of state which are responsible for certain tasks. So, but in this regard, I think let's always defend the institutions that defend democracy when it always suits us. And in this regard also, we should defend the bank, the Reserve Bank, for what they have actually done. We might not be happy coming from different parties and also as individual members of this committee. And we are going to record the reservations because that's parliamentary democracy. That not all of us were happy with the explanation of the Reserve Bank. But let's conclude this meeting with an understanding that the Reserve Bank has done what we have requested them to do last year, June. Alan, Tebuko Buhle, the announcements? Or before Alan and Buhle and Governor, I see you raising a hand.
Yes, I just wanted to thank the committee for the engagement. We treat our engagements with Parliament very seriously. We take our mandate seriously, and we will continue to execute our mandate without fear, favor, or prejudice. And once again, to thank the committee members for the engagement, and we do not take it for granted. Thank you.
Thanks, Governor.
Chairperson,
Honorable Mushbama.
So that we would not misunderstand each other, can the minutes reflect clearly that we object to your summary that the Reserve Bank did what we expected it to do? Can that be clearly stated in the minutes that we in the EFF, we object to your summary of this meeting?
Yes. Okay. Secretariat, can you do that as we always do when we come to conclusion of certain reports? I think it's parliamentary procedure that if a member or a party does not agree with the view of the majority, it should be in record. We will do so, Honorable Shubham. Secretariat, are there announcements?
Chairperson.
Dr. George?
Thank you very much. Yes. Thanks, Chair. I also did not agree with your summary. And obviously, my party will decide what its next course of action is. We are likely to approach the courts on this matter. Yes, so if you could just note that, yeah, we also do not support your summary. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dr. George. It will be recorded in the minutes. Support team, are there announcements before we close the meeting? If none, we have come to the conclusion of the meeting where we're engaging the Reserve Bank and the PA in regard to them tabling their annual reports. Thanks very much, honorable members. Thanks to the governor and the DGs and the entire team from the Reserve Bank and Treasury is here, and other entities that report to Treasury. Thanks to the media. Thanks to the support teams of Parliament, and in particular the team that support SCOF. The meeting is closed. You can see.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording stopped.